Psychiatric evaluation was done on January 16th of '97 by Dr. Robert McDaniel. I wanted to note in the record the inmate's version of the events as related in the report. When asked what her role was in the crimes committed, the inmate states that she was responsible for the stabbing of Abigail Folger. She indicates that she later got Tex Watson to help her in the killing as the woman was not yet dead. When asked how she knew, the inmate will indicate that the woman was still crying and making no noises. In the second set of murders, the inmate indicates that she attempted to stab Rosemary LaBianca. I asked the inmate if she also stabbed the woman's husband. The inmate indicates that she stabbed the woman's husband in the stomach with a fork. I asked the inmate if she left the fork in the body, and she replies, "I think so, yes." When asked if there was a lot of blood, she states, "Not that I remember." The mental status evaluation indicates that insight appears to be somewhat limited regarding relationship to other people, which will be discussed in further depth in the discussion section of this report. Judgment appeared good in that she has a good work ethic and has remained disciplinary free. The diagnosis, there was no diagnosis on Axis 1 and no diagnosis on Axis 2. The discussion, the inmate is a 49-year-old woman who indicates that Charles Manson essentially took over her identity and that she was not allowed to formulate any opinion. She took part in stabbing Abigail Folger and later Rosemary LaBianca. She will later admit stabbing the woman's husband with a fork, which she thinks she may have left in his stomach. At the time, it appeared that she was willing to consider herself at the expense of others. She considered herself in that she wanted the approval of those around her and apparently felt little for her victims. I would find notable that the bloodletting involved in the killing of Abigail Folger did not cause any degree of revulsion such that the second murder became impossible. I believe the inmate still to some degree considers herself at the expense of others. She fails to appreciate the safety of others and will place her own needs ahead of theirs. In addition, the inmate describes an incident in which another inmate became terrified after she accidentally splashed inmate Krenwinkel with water. The inmate will use this event to illustrate how she herself now takes things easy and does not become easily upset. To Dr. McDaniel, however, this event relates how the inmate did not feel compelled to reassure the woman who was terrified, but instead felt that the situation is something she can use to demonstrate her own improvement. When he hears this himself, however, he wonders what look of fear she saw upon her victims' faces, what look of fear she saw upon this other woman, and how easily it is for this individual to see a look of fear in other people without feeling compelled to reassure them in some way. While the inmate states that she laughed and turned away, thereby indicating to the other women that no offense was taken, he wonders if this is what the other person felt. In this, Dr. McDaniel sees a common thread in which the inmate tends to use others for her own purposes. Clearly, the inmate is not behaving with murderous rage as before, but her style of thinking, in his opinion, remains somewhat similar. While this individual has a good disciplinary record and appears to be someone who uniformly impresses others with work ethic, she is also someone who does not share the horror of bloodletting as might be expected by the typical person. Psychiatric conclusions. Certainly, to some degree, the diagnosed psychopathology has been related to criminal behavior historically, and that there must have been a great deal of sociopathy to be able to inflict such murderous behavior on multiple people. There is no current evidence for overt sociopathy currently demonstrated by this inmate, although Dr. McDaniel has commented upon her tendency to view her own needs at the expense of others. This is not necessarily psychopathology, but a characterologic trait. During observation in the institution, inmate Krenwinkel was psychiatrically improved, perhaps slightly, in the interval period, and that she seems to be attending more group therapy and becoming more introspective than in years past. Other examiners who have evaluated this inmate over the years have commented verbally that the inmate historically has been somewhat withdrawn into herself. She is much different at the present time of this evaluation. In a less controlled setting, such as return to the community, this inmate can be considered to hold present gains based upon her disciplinary record and good work ethic. He is unsure, however, how she continues to view the needs of others as compared to her own and can express uncertainty as to her future behavior. Violence potential outside a controlled setting is considered to have been greater than average in the past due to the viciousness of the crime, and that the initial murder did not deter her from further bloodletting. I believe it has now decreased based upon more positive influences in her life and her willingness to adhere to societal norms within the institution. He is less certain about whether or not she poses a violent potential in the community, as he continues to see a style of thinking that is reminiscent of her crime. In the remaining period, the inmate should continue her present rehabilitation period, which it perhaps may need to focus more upon how her behavior affects other individuals, what her responsibility is to someone, in whom she induces fear, and whether or not she should place her own needs ahead of someone else's needs. Ms. Park, any comments?
Because of the horrible crimes that Patricia Krenwinkel committed, I firmly believe that before the board should ever consider her as being a suitable candidate for parole, you should convince yourself to a near certainty that she no longer represents a danger to society. I think for the purpose of the hearing this year, that not only do we have her participation in these brutal murders, but Dr. McDaniel's psychiatric report, I think, stands as a large red blinking light warning you that she is still presents an unreasonable risk of harm to society. And the reason that I say that is because this is not a new problem with Patricia Krenwinkel. This is one that was present from the time of the murders and probably even before the murders on, and that is that she does not empathize with her victims. She sees people as objects and not as valuable human beings. Her victims and potential victims she views that way. My suggestion to you as an analogy is that she doesn't view people any differently than you or I would view a Kleenex that we blew our nose into and then threw into the trash can. The incident about her being squirted, I don't know what Ms. Park's going to say about that, but that is a very educational incident. And of course, Ms. Krenwinkel cited the incident to say, well, look, I didn't go off on her, and I think we're all happy that Ms. Krenwinkel didn't go off on the inmate. But look at it through the eyes of the inmate. Here the inmate accidentally squirts one of the three most notorious female murderers in United States history, and this woman has a look of terror on her face. What does Patricia Krenwinkel do? She laughs at her. Now, is that a normal response that we expect from human beings, to laugh at somebody with a look of terror on their face? Dr. McDaniel is not the first psychiatrist or psychologist to see this problem. I strongly would urge the board members to refer to page 4 of the 1988 board psychiatric report done by Dr. Francis. Dr. Francis, on page 4 of his reports, had a lengthy discussion about his discussion with Patricia Krenwinkel about how she viewed Abigail Folger, this woman that she admits repeatedly stabbing. She chased her out of the home with an upraised knife, pounced on her in the front yard, and stabbed her repeatedly. And she told Dr. Francis in the report that she was ambivalent to the person of Miss Folger because Miss Folger should have made more of her life than being a drug abuser, and that Miss Folger's murder may have been a tragedy, but Dr. Francis said that Miss Krenwinkel was not flooded by remorse for the senseless murder of 7 innocent people and for her participation in those murders. I suggest to you that if a suspect views a victim or potential victim as an object rather than as an important, valuable human being, it's a lot easier to commit violence on that person than if you think that they're valuable, that they have worth, and you can relate that back to this incident with the woman squirting her. I mean, she didn't look at that person as a person. She thought about herself. The only victim that Patricia Krenwinkel has ever empathized with is herself, because she thinks that she's a victim of all of Manson and this whole thing, but she doesn't see other people as other than objects. So I think Dr. McDaniel wrote a very intelligent report, really got into her mind, and he didn't think this stuff up on his own. I mean, this has been a problem that Dr. Francis recognized. It was recognized at the time of her murders, and I think that should play a big part in the board's decision this year. In addition to that, her participation in the 2 nights of murders, and just the fact that she could participate in 2 nights of murder after the first night was so brutal, and then she spent the day, she and Atkins, watching news accounts of the first night of murder on TV, and yet didn't think anything about going out the second night. And you know, she inflicted the first stab wound on Mrs. LaBianca when Leslie Van Houten pinned Mrs. LaBianca down to the bed. Patricia Krenwinkel stabbed her with such force and hit her in the collarbone that the knife that she got from the kitchen, the blade bent. And then Van Houten knew that Watson had bigger knife and went out and got him, and then he and Van Houten finished off Mrs. LaBianca, be given the maximum 5-year denial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kay. Ms. Park?
Thank you. Perhaps now the board can see why we're having problems with this particular report. And it's not just because, gee, we don't like it. And I don't want the board to think that way. There are some serious problems with it. First of all, I believe items are completely taken out of context. And I think for Mr. Kay to say, well, gee, pay attention to this report, it's the only thing we have going for us, is that this woman was in fear because she squirted the most notorious female murderer in the U.S. This female probably hasn't the foggiest idea who Patricia Krenwinkel is or who Charles Manson is. I'm sorry you find that amusing. I don't need to be laughed at because somebody thinks my comments are not even worth the courtesy of being listened to. But let's put it this way. This happened 28 years ago. You take somebody who is 28 years old or 30 years old or even 35 years old, they don't know who Charles Manson is. I have 3 grown children. They never knew who Charles Manson was because this happened that long ago. So to assume that somebody who is a great deal younger than Ms. Krenwinkel to be put in fear because she squirted the most notorious female murderer in the U.S. is completely wrong. And that isn't it. This is a prison. If people do something like squirt somebody or bump into them or whatever, a lot of people are very afraid that there will, oh dear, what's going to be the reaction? And usually the natural thing is you just shine it on and then everybody's just fine. You don't go and sit in this prison with signs on you saying notorious murderer. I mean, that isn't how it works. And thank you.
Okay. At this time, we're going to hear from Debra Tate, sister of the victim, and she has a statement she'd like to make.
Ms. Krenwinkel's counsel made a few statements that perked my ears. The first thing being that this is a life consideration hearing. Where was Sharon's life consideration hearing? The job opportunities, the futures, the excellent doings within this extremely controlled environment as some kind of a plus. As far as I'm concerned, I cannot overlook what she did 27 years ago. I will never be able to overlook what she took part in 27 years ago. For me, a very beautiful creature in life was robbed of her life and robbed of her possibilities to continue on and to live. And as far as I am concerned, I believe from the bottom of my heart that we should not even be having this discussion, that when one takes a life, they should be willing to forfeit their own. As far as her being mind controlled, there is not a human being on this earth that under any circumstances could get me to participate in such an activity. And I think that most of us in this room could make that same kind of statement. It's just absolutely appalls me to think that we are actually here to consider the possibility of releasing these people back into society. I'm having a very tough time with it. And basically that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, we're going to